In the two previous videos, we introduced the first 2/3 of the Greek alphabet, letters alpha through P. Before we move on, let's review what you have already learned thus far. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, P. Great job! One more time. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, P. We'll begin our final portion of the study of the Greek alphabet with a letter that can be initially confusing to English speakers, rho. The thing that can make rho tough to remember at first is that it looks like the English P, especially in capital form, but its sound corresponds to the English R, as in run. However, it happens to be right after the Greek equivalent of P, which you learned in Part 2. It's not uncommon to confuse rho for a P sound when you're first learning Greek. A little bit of extra attention early on will help you associate the proper sound with this letter. The next letter of the Greek alphabet, sigma, is unique in that it has 3 forms: capital, lowercase, and a final form. Sigma is the same as the English S, as in sun. In its capital form, it looks a bit like an E or an angular backwards 3. You could also think of it as an M tilted on its side. The lowercase form looks similar to a lowercase omicron, differentiated by the tail that trails off of the top to the right. In lowercase form, this letter could be easy to mistake depending on one's handwriting. In addition, sigma is the only Greek letter that possesses a final form. To an English speaker, this form should be relatively easy to recognize, as it bears similarity to a lowercase s, with a portion dropping into the subscript. The final form of sigma is used exclusively at the end of words, whereas the standard lowercase form is used in the middle of words. Here is an example from a name that you are familiar with: Jesus, Jesus. Note the difference in forms between the first and second sigmas. Tau is another letter that should be easy for you to recognize, corresponding to the English T in sound, as in today, and in form. The only difference between the English and Greek forms is in the lower case. In contrast to the English form, the Greek form looks like a smaller version of the capital. Upsilon can be both easy and difficult depending on which form you're looking at. Its capital is basically the same as the English Y, while its lowercase is very close to an English U. It is pronounced like an accented U. Think of the sound the double O in oops makes as a starting point. As you listen to more Greek, you will develop the nuance for pronouncing this letter. You may also sometimes hear people pronounce this letter more like an English Y. For example, the Greek word for Lord is kurios, or kyrios. The sequence of letters we've covered is very similar to that found in the English alphabet. Rho, sigma, tau, upsilon is the same as RSTU in English. The next 3 letters, however, are unique, having no single English equivalent: phi or phi, chi or chi, and si or psi. Like theta, these letters all represent sound combinations in English. As with P, you're probably already familiar with phi from your math classes. The symbol is unique, with a minor resemblance to an English Q in the lower case. Phi is the representation of the English PH sound, as in phone. For our purposes, you could also think of it as an F sound, as in family. Similarly to not being confused with P and rho, you also want to pay attention to the difference between xi and chi. Where xi is closest to the sound of the English X, he looks like the English X. Its sound, however, is closest to the CH in the Scottish word loch, as in Loch Ness. Again, for our purposes, though, you can think of this letter as the CH in ache, or, to use a more biblical example, Christ, Christos. C is the last letter standing for a combination of English sounds. It represents a PS sound, as in psychology. Both capital and lowercase forms look similar to each other, each resembling a pitchfork. Finally, we have arrived at the end of the 24 letters of the Greek alphabet. The last letter is one you'll already be familiar with if you have spent some time in your Bible, Omega. You'll recall that Greek has two letters that equivocate to the English letter O. You have already studied the first, Omicron, in the previous video. Omega is the other. Made obvious by its name, Omega is the same as the long O sound in English, as in OK. It's never to be read as a short O. Omicron only is read that way. Capital Omega looks like a horseshoe, while the lowercase looks similar to an English W. I recommend paying some attention to the lowercase form to properly associate the symbol with its sound. Congratulations! You've now learned the entire Greek alphabet. Let's say the whole thing in sequence. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, phi, chi, C, Omega. Awesome. One final time. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, phi, chi, C, Omega. Practice saying all of the letters in order periodically throughout your day, emphasizing pronunciation each time. Also practice reading them online, or if you have a Greek New Testament, identifying them in the text, as well as writing them down yourself. Before too long, you will develop fluid use and recognition of them all. For a further study of Greek, I recommend Greek 101, Learning an Ancient Language from the Great Courses, and Basics of Biblical Greek by Zondervan Academic. You will find links to both of these courses in the description.